Jonas Paulius II man visada buvo įkvepiantis krikščioniško gyvenimo, laimingo kunigo ir rimto mąstytojo pavyzdys. Dalijasi moralinės teologijos profesorius, dominikonas, kunigas Jarosław Kupczak. Kviečiame klausytis jo paskaitos Jono Pauliaus II moralinė teologija, skaitytos Studentų ateitininkų rudens akademijoje, jūs patys esate bažnyčia. Šventasis popiežius Jonas Paulius II. Paskaita skaitoma anglų kalba.
Probably every one of the lecturers today started the lecture from some kind of introductory remarks which centered on the difficulty to choose what to talk about in such a broad topic that has been given to us. Moral theology of John Paul II. This is my topic for this afternoon. Let me start with two methodological points. First, I would like to give you what I would call a chronological perspective. So I would like to speak not only about John Paul II and moral theology, but I would like to show you how his mature views were shaped. Secondly, this will allow me to point out a quite important topic which may be of interest to some or many of you, namely relation between theology and philosophy. There is no theology or there is no moral theology without a certain philosophy, without a certain natural understanding of who we are and how we act. Therefore, speaking about moral theology of John Paul II, we have to start with the young philosopher from Krakow, young philosopher and young priest from Krakow, and his beginnings of getting into serious thinking, which led him to shaping his mature views on moral theology. Now, so much about the methods of my talk. Now, what about the specific content? We know the general content. It's going to be about moral theology and ethics. But what about more specific content? It seems to me that the whole intellectual heritage that was left us by John Paul II stays on two pillars, two intellectual pillars. The first is his concept of love. The second is his concept of human freedom. So love and human freedom as two most important particular topics with which I would like to start. If we have time, I will talk more about his more specific views on contemporary crisis in moral theology and how to solve it. But if we have time, it seems to me that it's better to start with outlining the foundation of his thought than just with presenting his mature views. So let me start with those two topics, which I will present according to those two methodological principles that I outline. Love. Well, Karol Wojtyła grew up as a young man of your age in the Second World War Krakow, and became a young priest in the years immediately after the Second World War. He became student's chaplain, working with students in Krakow. So no wonder that one of the main interests of his intellectual involvement became love. Love in every age, but especially in students' age, when you think about forming a family, when you fall in love. These are the topics that students came very often to him. And then this young Karol Wojtyła noticed quite early that there is something profoundly wrong with love in this middle of the 20th century. There were many things wrong with love in post-Second World War Poland. Probably in Lithuania and other European countries it was similar. Well, these were the post-war times. Everybody came out of the war wounded with a serious spiritual scars. Everybody psychologically and spiritually, let me put it this way, was sick. And this meant also inability to love, right? Then we lived in the communist society, very violent, and especially during the Stalinist years, very violent, very anti-Christian. So this was difficult to think about forming a normal family, creating a normal marriage. But, and this is something very interesting, Karol Wojtyła, a young philosopher who studied especially phenomenology of Max Scheler, noticed that there was something more profoundly wrong with love in Europe in the 20th century than just the after Second World War effect. What was this problem with love in Max Scheler? Well, as you know, Max Scheler was one of the early founders of European phenomenology, close collaborator of Edmund Husserl, the founder of modern phenomenology, profoundly influential thinker. In a sense, Max Scheler was a prophet of 20th century. As all great philosophers, they prophesize about future. So with every great philosopher, as you know, when we read the books of Friedrich Nietzsche, when we read the books of Schleiermacher, Hegel, they not only describe the present culture, but they are able to show us, Michel Foucault, what the culture will be in 100 years or in 50 years. Now, of course, the history is going much quicker than it used to be. So, what Max Scheler tells us about present state of love? Well, Scheler, using the language of Alistair MacIntyre from his famous book, I remember the Polish title now. The Polish title is Dziedzictwo Cnoty, but more important is the English title, which is The End of Virtue. Well, it will come to my mind. One of the most important books of the second part of the 20th century, where Alistair MacIntyre says the whole culture, after virtue, thank you. This is After Virtue of Alistair MacIntyre, where MacIntyre says that the whole ethics of the second part of the 20th century is about emotions. It's about what we feel. Well, Karol Wojtyła read exactly this from Max Scheler. Scheler, as I said, immensely influential thinker of the early 20th century, talks a lot about love. But in Scheler, love is all about emotions, is all how we feel. No wonder that young Wojtyła, meeting with his students in Krakow, realized that even in communist Poland, in 1950s and 60s of the previous century, this is exactly how the students feel. Love becomes a changeable feeling. So this is the first challenge, intellectual challenge that Wojtyła faces, to say the truth about human love. Of course, I will outline to you only the main directions. We do not have time for more detailed analysis. What are the main directions of Wojtyła's solutions? First, Wojtyła realizes that to combat this emotionalist notion of love, you have to take a personalist take on love. What does it exactly mean? To take a personalist account of love is to understand that if love is so important for us, it has to be an act of a person. It has to be an act of a person. Now, an act of a person can never be a just purely emotional act. Emotions are important, but act of a person, as the classical philosophy of Thomas Aquinas would say, act of a person has to involve reason and will. Well, Wojtyła discovers rather obvious and simple thing, but extremely important, that love has to be a rational act of a person. I love has to involve reason and will. Now, that's first part of Wojtyła's solution. What's the second part? The second part is that love as an act of a person is always directed to another person. And that's something that Wojtyła will reflect upon as a philosopher and theologian to the end of his life. What does it mean that love is directed as an act of a person to another person? Well, another person is another I. Every one of us knows what is I. I is a center of the world for me, because I see the whole world, everything, as an I. And I is in the middle of my world, whether I am conscious of it or not. But if another person is also an I, it means that in love, two centers of the world meet, and those two centers of the world have to be aware of each other. That my center meets another center. And in order to love personally, person to person, I have to take account of this different world that I meet in the act of love. Now, so that's one of the first trajectories of Wojtyła's thought. Of course, Wojtyła is aware when young people come to him that we are bodily beings, and in human love, the human body plays a very important part. We love somebody not angelically, but we love the person looks, walks, speaks. We love the person who is the body. Of course, this bodily love has also a very important erotic dimension. Erotic, which is connected with erotic desires, natural for men and for women. Desires that bring us together. However, one of the main trajectories of Wojtyła's thought would be remember always that erotism has to be integrated into personal life. Erotic dimension is only a means to an end. and not an end in itself. So the whole emotional aspect of love is extremely important, but it has to be integrated in the love as a personal act of the person. So this is young Wojtyła. Pretty much everything that I said so far can be found in the first important book that Wojtyła wrote, the book that signalizes the end of the first stage in his thought, let's call it phenomenological state. I speak about the book Love and Responsibility from 1960. I don't know whether it exists in the Lithuanian language. It does. Terrific. Of course, for all of you, as you well know, is a must read. It's difficult to read, but it must read, and it didn't lose really any actuality. So what I said so far can be found in this book. Next stage in Wojtyła's development of his thinking about love comes in with the Second Vatican Council. The Second Vatican Council is an extremely important time for Karol Wojtyła. It is the council that makes Wojtyła world intellectual. Until council, he is just very bright priest and bishop, young bishop from Krakow in Lublin. During the council, he becomes a world intellectual. He meets the brightest from all over the world. To the end of his life, he will always speak about the council as the event of the Holy Spirit, which is important to underline, especially now when we have a certain opposition among Catholics toward the Second Vatican Council. But this is not the topic of our lecture. How the council influences Wojtyła's thought about love? Well, the most important statement of the council that Wojtyła will repeat quite often in all his writings comes from the number 22 of the Constitution Gaudium et Spes. The human person cannot find itself unless he or she becomes a gift for the other. In other words, we cannot find our own fulfillment. We cannot find our own happiness unless we become a gift for the other, gift of love. Now, gift, a very traditional word in Catholic theology, Trinitarian theology, Christological theology, donum, Latin donum, becomes a term to express love. Wojtyła will use this term in all his writings after the council. Love is about becoming a gift for the other. What is important in this notion, becoming a gift for the other? Well, traditional philosophy and theology spoke about love rather in terms of doing good for the other, of doing good things for the other, of taking care of the other. Wojtyła speaks about a gift. What is the difference between doing good for the other and becoming a gift for the other? Well, the difference is very serious, because in this personalist perspective tells us that the most important good that we can give the persons we love is ourselves, is our attention, is our knowledge, is our time. And of course, in the marital relationship, very seriously is the whole person with the body. The husband gives his own body to his wife. The wife gives her own body to the husband. It's a gift of oneself. It's a serious stuff, right? Love becomes not a matter of Schellerian emotions, when you feel one day you feel this, the other day you feel the other thing. One day you go with one girl, a man goes with one girl, the second day the other seems more attractive, and so on. With this notion of the gift as a personal act, love becomes a matter of personal involvement in the relationship of the other that brings with itself, life project, because it's a personal involvement of the whole person. Of course, the second part of, or the last part of this development of philosophy and theology of love in Karol Wojtyła has become celebrated catechesis on theology of the body. We do not have time here to speak more on that, but the more and more I think about them, I speak about them, I am convinced that they are the most radical and clear formulation of Catholic theology of marriage and family vis-a-vis the remains of the sexual revolution and the decadent sexual culture in which we live today. And I meet more and more young people, young couples, mature couples that say that theology of the body saved their marriage, saved the relationship, because they really didn't know how to build the relationship together, especially in the sexual relation, because there is, as you know, there is so much junk in the culture today on that. And you have really to be well-formed and well-informed to oppose this junk that comes to us from the popular culture, from the mass media, from the Hollywood movies, from everywhere. One has to be counterculture in this respect. So much about love. So much time we have. Let me get to the second topic, freedom. Equally important. There was, as I said, every great philosopher, every great thinker, I know that some of you are from the political philosophy department, every great thinker, I think, finds the subject for his or her thinking on the street. Not necessarily in the books. It's important to read books. But great thinkers have an ear to hear what's happening on the street, what's happening among the people who live normal life, which is all of us living normal life. As I said, Wojtyła found his topic of love in his conversations with young people and realized that this is it. This is the big subject problem for the 20th century and later. The same was with freedom. How did it happen with freedom? Well, in a sense, it was easy. Because young Wojtyła, as I said, he grew up in the Second World War, Krakow. No political freedom. Then the liberators came in the parentheses, the Russian soldiers, but Surprise, surprise, no freedom after the liberation. No political freedom, no freedom of conscience, no freedom of religion. So it was easy to think about the problem of freedom, about a lack of freedom in the 50s and 60s of the previous century. But then, great thinkers do not think on the surface, but they go deeper. There is a great book of Karol Wojtyła. Unfortunately, I don't think is in Lithuanian, but please, I would be happy to be corrected in this regard. It's called Lublin Lectures. Lublin Lectures, these are the lectures of the young Wojtyła from University of Lublin in 1950s. He started to teach there in 53. He went to 57, 5 years, 5 monographic lectures, which is really a journey of young Wojtyła through philosophical culture of the West. Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, Thomas Aquinas, Saint Augustine, Immanuel Kant, British utilitarian philosophers, John Locke, Francis Bacon, ends with Immanuel Kant and Max Scheler. Pretty much what every young professor should do. Go through the history of his own discipline, his own thought. Now, I cannot give you again the more detailed analysis, but let me give you the conclusions of this Wojtyła philosophical and historical journey. By the way, Lublin Lectures exist in German, Lubliner Vorlesungen. They, I believe, exist in Italian. I think I know that the English translators work on that. So pretty soon we will have this also in English. Going back to the conclusions of Lublin Lectures, one of the conclusions is Wojtyła, to his great surprise, studying the idea of freedom, of act of the free will, or free act of the will, in his Lublin Lectures, Wojtyła finds to his great surprise that in the great philosophers of the European modernity, namely Immanuel Kant and Max Scheler, there is no idea of freedom. There is no proper account of human freedom. And this is extremely surprising for Wojtyła because, well, we talking about Kant and Scheler, we talk about the main philosophers of the European modernity. What is the problem in those two philosophers with human freedom? For Kant, freedom becomes an aspect of the reason. In this rationalism of Immanuel Kant, free will kind of disappears with own act in the shadow of human reason. In a sense, Wojtyła very brilliantly notices that Kant paradoxically goes back to the Greek philosophers. His idea of act of the will is very close to that of the Aristotle, pre-Christian thinkers, where act of the will was really an act of the reason, not a separate faculty, but simply a certain deliberation, rational deliberation of the reason. So not really, of course, Kant talks about the will, but if you look closer, this will is really a part of the reason. What about Scheller? Well, Scheller, of course, is on the high wave of European liberal culture. He is this poet of human freedom, of human autonomy. But, surprise, surprise, if you read closer his analysis, you find that for Max Scheller, human will is really an emotional faculty. Human will, as Alistair McIntyre pointed very well, human will is really an emotion, is really something that I feel. I follow my feeling. That's what the will is about, willingness in Max Scheller. So Wojtyła says, look, well, we have a problem. On the one hand, we have a great tradition, modern tradition of Immanuel Kant, with this rational disappearance of free will. On the other hand, we have a very influential and very much foreseeing postmodernity, emotionalism or emotivism of Max Scheller, where I do what I feel. I do what it feels like. That's not human will. That's not traditional notion of human freedom. So in the Lublin lecture, in this very penetrating analysis, Wojtyła goes back to classical philosophy and classical theology, also to Thomas Aquinas. And Wojtyła finds in Thomas Aquinas an adequate what he would call an adequate notion of human will and human freedom. What are the elements of this adequate take on human freedom? Well, first, there is a separate notion, separate faculty of human will. Human will. This is not a reason, this is a will. But human will is always rational. So if you want to be a free person, you have to know the reasons why you're acting like you're acting. So will has to always cooperate with reason. We have to give reasons why we act, why we laugh, why we do this and not that. If we don't give reasons, if we do not reflect on our choices, if we do not give an account of the good that we choose, then this is not freedom. This is just doing whatever. A person who does, if you ask somebody, a man, what are you doing? And this person asks you, well, I am doing what I am doing. What is your problem? This is not a freedom. This is just doing whatever. Doing whatever is not what human freedom is about. Why? Because we are rational beings and we have to take care of this rational dimension of who we are, right? Freedom, the same as I said about love, has to be an act of a person free and reasonable. So Wojtyła picks up from this analysis in Lublin lectures of modern philosophers, especially Kant and Scheller, this idea that the main problem in liberal culture is simply a wrong concept of freedom. As you know from readings, different books and encyclicals of John Paul II, he will ride this horse till the end of his life. this subject will take in his writings the idea of his criticism of absolute freedom. What does it mean when, for example, in most of his encyclicals, he criticizes the idea of the absolute freedom? What exactly means absolute freedom? Absolute freedom is a freedom that is not dependent on truth. Freedom that is not dependent on truth. So, absolute freedom is unlimited freedom, unbounded freedom. Wojtyła, in his main philosophical work, The Acting Person, will come with an idea that mature freedom is a freedom that knows its limits. Why? Because, speaking in terms of the Christian theology, we are creatures. We are creatures. And every creature, a mark of every creature created by somebody else is to be bound by laws that we did not create ourselves. We accept the laws that we did not create ourselves in physics. Nobody is going to deny the law of gravitation. If somebody does, it will end up very badly, right? Do not forget about the law of gravitation. But if we think that now we have to abide all the law that keep us from COVID, we did not envision, created all those laws, what we should do and what we cannot do in the age of COVID. Somebody else said you have to obey to be healthy. Now, what makes you think that in the moral life there is no laws? There are no laws. What make the modern person to think that we obey the laws of gravitation in physics, but we do not obey the laws of the moral life, which also has to be dependent on the laws that we do not create ourselves, but we just read those laws from the human nature. What is human nature? Is the truth about who we are. Medicine tells us about our bodily and psychological. Psychology tells us about our psychological dimension, but philosophy and theology has to tell us about our spiritual dimension, because there are also laws in our spiritual realm. So this is a realistic concept of the human freedom. Human freedom as an aspect of who we are. There is a huge dimension for the creativity of the human person in the moral life, in the ethical life. There is a great sphere of creativity but this creativity has to start with the moral laws that we did not create ourselves. Of course, as John Paul II will spell out, especially in the encyclical Veritatis Splendor, what we talk about now is so-called natural law. Natural law as laws that, most fundamental laws that describe who we are. This is the ethical DNA of the human person, right? DNA tells us who we are on the biological level, but Decalogue tells us who we are on the moral level, on the ethical level. only if we accept that we can be human, right? So much about freedom. Of course, this Wojtyła criticism of absolute concept of freedom, very much, I think, when Wojtyła speaks about absolute concept of freedom, he has in mind people like Jean-Paul Sartre. If you want for your own analysis and for your own papers to find an example of such a absolute concept of freedom, read Jean-Paul Sartre. For example, his small book, but very clear in this respect, called Existentialism is Humanism. Existentialism is Humanism. It's a very short book, but basically spelling out how modernity understands freedom. And this is what Wojtyła criticizes. So this is Karol Wojtyła, John Paul II, against Jean-Paul Sartre and the culture that he symbolizes. Of course, with Karol Wojtyła and John Paul II, both what I said about freedom and love has many further developments with love into Karol Wojtyła's, John Paul II, theology of marriage and family. With freedom, Wojtyła's concept of freedom is developed in his social thinking, especially in the encyclical Centesimus Annus, great criticism of modern society, and in Veritatis Splendor, criticism of modern ethical mistakes and failures. Let me say one last remark before I will hear your questions and comments. Well, I guess I wanted to start with this remark, but I forgot. So, but it can also work, I think, as a final remark. When you say moral theology, you really say also simultaneously a different thing, namely, you say anthropology. Ethics and anthropology, these are two ends of the same stick. Ethics and anthropology, or anthropology and ethics. They always go together. If you ask one question about who is the human person, who we are, you have to get into ethics, because who we are is how we act, what we do. And what we do is always an ethical question. We do right or wrong. But the same works in the other direction. If you ask the question, okay, so what are the moral norms, how we should live together, how we should act, you're always asking the question who we are. And this has also, so in Karol Wojtyła, those two elements go always together. Anthropology and ethics. Anthropology, and is Wojtyła more anthropologist or moral theologian or ethical philosopher? You cannot answer this question, because with him, those two things go together. It has also many other, this statement or this link has also many other consequences. But since my time is up, I will finish with that and eventually.